Glad you joined. Let's get settled in, grab that comfy pillow, add a fan for some background ambient noise if you like, and let your head hit that pillow. Before we get started on this epic tale, we'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe, as this helps us out tremendously. We have worked hard putting this together for you. And drop a comment and let us know where you are from. We are always interested in countries people are listening from. So now, let's begin. Long before Scotland bore its name, before stone castles rose from the hills or battle cries echoed through the glens, the Highlands were a realm of mist, silence, and ancient breath. In that time, the world felt older, wilder. The skies were often slate grey, and the mountains stood like sleeping giants, shrouded in pine and legend. It was in this forgotten age that a great valley was torn open by the retreat of a glacier, and from that wound came water, black, still, and endless. This water became Loch Ness. Before Scotland wore its name or the Highlands echoed with songs of clans and kings, this land was ancient and wild, a place shaped not by hands but by titanic forces. Ice ruled here once, and as it retreated it carved valleys so deep that the earth seemed to mourn their making. One such scar, long and narrow, would fill with water blacker than night, becoming what we now call Loch Ness, 22 miles long, over 700 feet deep, and forever cloaked in mist. This loch is not merely a body of water, it is a monument to mystery. Its surface reflects little, its depths offer less. It swallows light, it swallows sound, and according to legend, it also swallows time. Long before any written word, the people of this region, the Picts, lived along its banks. Mysterious, tribal and artistic, the Picts left behind no scrolls or books, only stone. In these carvings we find spirals, animals, celestial patterns, and something else. Serpentine forms, long-necked creatures, bodies like waves, eyes like watchers. These images weren't mythical flourishes. To the Picts, they were memory. They called the loch sacred, a boundary between this world and another. The druids who followed performed rites at the water's edge. Offerings of antlers, bronze blades, and carved idols were cast into the depths as tribute to what might dwell beneath. In some traditions, the water was believed to possess a will. It could choose who crossed and who vanished. Travelers were known to disappear in the fog, never to return. Entire processions would stop in silence when the mist grew too thick, claiming they felt a presence moving beneath their feet. The legend grew. By torchlight, tales were told of a creature who watched from the shadows, never surfacing in full, never attacking, but always waiting. It was not a monster in the way sea beasts were told in sailor taverns. No, this was a guardian, or perhaps a prisoner, something ancient, something that belonged to the loch the way mountains belong to the earth. They named it, quietly, the Deep One, the Watcher Below, the Old Kin, and always they said, if you waited long enough and stood in silence by the shore, you would feel it, not see it, but feel its presence, steady as the earth. By the 6th century, the Highland mists had not yet lifted for the cross. Christianity had begun to weave its influence through Britain, carried by robed missionaries and illuminated scrolls. Yet, in the northern glens, where wind and rain shaped rock and memory alike, older powers still ruled. The druids had faded into whispers, but their reverence for nature endured. The loch, black and silent, remained sacred ground. Into this wild and untouched world came Saint Columba, a man of noble Irish blood who turned from war to faith, choosing sacred texts over swords. In 565 AD, he made his way into Caledonia, the northern kingdom of the Picts, seeking to spread the gospel where no monk had tread. It was along the banks of the river Ness, the very artery of the loch, that Columba's path crossed with legend. He came upon a funeral procession. A man had died, drowned, taken by something in the water. Not a storm, not a current, a creature. The locals described it with hushed tones and pale faces, something enormous, smooth-backed, cold-blooded, and waiting just beneath the surface. Columba, unwavering, ordered one of his followers to swim across the river. The man obeyed. The crowd watched, then the surface broke. A hulking shadow surged toward the swimmer, creating a wave without wind. But Columba raised his hand, called upon his god, and commanded the beast to retreat. Miraculously, it stopped, it stared, and it sank into the black without a ripple. Adamnan, Columba's biographer, recorded the event in sacred Latin, inscribing the moment into ecclesiastical history. The church claimed it as a miracle, but the Highlanders who lived beside the loch heard something different in the tale. Not a beast defeated, but acknowledged. The creature had obeyed a force it recognized, not because it was holy, but because it was powerful. In their eyes, Columba had not conquered the legend of the loch. He had joined it. The story spread quickly, not just through monasteries, but over heaths and into hills. More came, pilgrims, priests, seekers of signs, and they brought with them new stories. The water grew louder in the minds of the people. Men began to report strange movements beneath calm surfaces. Women heard sounds like moaning wails deep at night. Sheep would stop and refuse to drink. Dogs trembled near the shallows. Children spoke of glowing eyes that vanished when watched. The loch was changing, or perhaps it was waking. Columba's moment had not sealed the legend. It had lit the fire, and from that fire something older than history stirred beneath the surface, unseen but never unfelt. Though centuries passed, the legend did not dim. Instead, it deepened, like the waters themselves. In the medieval period, Loch Ness was no longer just a body of water, it had become a boundary, a border between the known and the unknowable. Highland clans who lived along its edges treated it with reverent fear. They refused to fish beyond certain depths. They avoided the loch after dusk. Rituals became localized customs, no longer druidic rites but inherited instincts. Charms, woven from straw, bits of heather and animal bones were placed near water paths. Children were taught not to speak loudly near the shoreline, lest something below be disturbed. While monks chronicled scripture, they also recorded anomalies, stories passed to them by farmers, warriors and fishermen. One account, preserved in a fragmented vellum leaf from 1234, told of a hunter pulled into the shallows by something long, muscular and silent. The corpse, when recovered, bore no teeth marks, only blistered skin and ruptured vessels. In 1298, during the First War of Scottish Independence, a contingent of soldiers stationed near the loch vanished in the night. Their fires were still warm. Horses remained tethered, but no trace of men. It was said the water had simply taken them, not in violence, but in defense, as though they had crossed a line. As time progressed, so did the shape of the myth. Some called the creature Ichig, the water horse, a malevolent being that could shift form, seduce victims into riding it, then dive into the depths with them still attached. Others believed it was Nisig, a guardian, ancient and intelligent, protecting something deeper than gold or relics, perhaps the loch itself. The creature, they said, had moods. Some days it was dormant, others it was watching. When the wind blew east and the birds flew west, it was said you must not walk alone, especially near water. A letter from a 14th century abbot spoke of hearing a sound like a low brass horn under the surface. He called it a hymn from the abyss. Travelers described glimpses of dark arches rolling beneath the surface like backs of submerged cattle. But no cattle swam there. The loch did not invite explanation, it punished assumption. Clergy warned their flocks that to chase the creature was to chase pride, to name it was to lose favor. It was neither demon nor angel. It was a truth buried in water, and those who sought to understand it too deeply often never returned. The people of the Highlands adapted. They did not try to kill the beast, they lived alongside it. They left portions of their catch on the rocks. They avoided construction near the deepest parts, and every generation passed on the same lesson. Loch Ness remembers. It remembers oaths, trespasses and songs, and in its remembering, it waits. Never sleeping, never gone, just below the surface, listening. As the Renaissance swept through Europe, bringing reason and science to the fore, the Highlands held fast to its mist and mystery. While cities built observatories and charted stars, the loch remained unmapped below its surface. Artists who visited the region painted its waters as black glass, unbroken but never still. One such oil painting from 1582 shows a scene now infamous in Highland folklore. A shepherd standing on a crag near Dawes, gazing over the water as a dark serpentine neck emerges from the mist. Though dismissed as fantasy, the painter claimed the vision was true, a fleeting moment when the loch showed its truth. It became the basis for countless future depictions. During this age, a shift occurred. The beast of Loch Ness was no longer seen only as a threat but a symbol, something ancient that endured while the world changed. While the Protestant Reformation divided parishes, the people of the loch still left offerings at stones etched with Pictish spirals. A carving discovered in 1601 during the rebuilding of a ruined chapel bore the figure of a long-necked creature with its tail curled around a circle, the ancient Celtic symbol for eternity. Scholars argued over its meaning. Locals needed no explanation. The loch had always been eternal. Travel journals from English noblemen described strange fogs that clung only to the water, refusing to lift even in midday sun. One account tells of a Highland woman who lit a floating lantern every night, sending it onto the water as an act of appeasement. She claimed her family was spared from sickness by doing so. Her descendants continued the ritual for more than 200 years. When asked why, they answered only, "It watches so we remember." Accounts grew stranger. In 1673, a fisherman swore under oath that a ripple broke near his boat with no wind or cause. Beneath the surface he saw what looked like a glowing eye. It blinked, then vanished. A priest travelling with him saw nothing but later dreamt of a voice rising from the water, chanting in a language he could not name. He returned to the church and never spoke of the loch again. From this century came tales of lights beneath the surface, some blue, others white, that moved like embers under a frozen lake. These lights became central to Highland stories. They were not seen as evil. They were signs that the loch was awake. By the end of the 1600s, the creature was rarely mentioned as a killer. It had become a witness, a keeper, a memory in flesh. The loch itself had become a stage for myth, and the creature its silent actor. Whether you believed or not, all who came to its shores felt the same thing: presence. And presence, in such a place, was everything. The 1800s ushered in steam, steel, and the mechanized roar of the Industrial Revolution, yet the loch held fast to silence. Railways now sliced through mountains, smoke poured from chimneys, and telegraphs clicked their staccato rhythms across great distances. Still, Loch Ness remained untouched at its core. While bridges rose and towns expanded, its waters held secrets that neither dynamite nor dredge could unlock. Engineers arrived, hoping to tame the Highlands. They left changed, quieter, more thoughtful, some even unwilling to speak of the strange calm that seemed to hover over the loch. It was during this time that early attempts at scientific observation were made. A group of Edinburgh naturalists constructed a rudimentary sonar-like device to measure depth using bell tones and weighted lines. When the tones were played across the water, odd echoes returned, layered, delayed, as if bouncing off something that was not rock or silt. In their log, one entry read, "Not all sounds return. Some seem swallowed." The Victorian Age's obsession with cataloguing the natural world extended to Loch Ness. Expeditions were funded by aristocrats who had read too many ghost stories and hoped to capture a glimpse of the beast between tea and hunting trips. One well-documented event from 1856 described a massive wake that broke across the loch's surface on a perfectly still day. The observer, Lady Eliza Calder, noted in her journal that it moved against the breeze and trailed no boat. She drew a sketch, not unlike the serpent shapes from medieval woodcuts, but added an odd detail, a single glowing spot beneath the surface, like an eye watching from below. As photography emerged, the creature became both elusive and sought after. Early images were blurred, shadowed, or corrupted by water damage, but one photo, taken by a shepherd in 1889, showed what appeared to be a long, curved shape breaching the surface in the fog. It was dismissed by skeptics, but local Highlanders recognized the form. To them, it matched carvings passed down through generations, carvings that predated Christ. Meanwhile, stories of the loch's unusual lights continued. Steamship crews navigating near Urquhart Bay reported seeing greenish glows beneath the bow, moving parallel to them for several minutes before vanishing. One captain claimed his compass spun erratically whenever the glow was nearby. Another wrote that a single ripple once circled his vessel like a protective boundary. Though none claimed to see the creature outright, they all spoke of presence, something massive, aware and unthreatening, but clearly there. Despite the march of modernity, the people of the Highlands refused to let the legend fade. Poets wrote odes to the old kin. A statue was erected in 1897 in a village near Drumnadrochit, a granite monument, not of a monster, but of a single eye above a ring of waves. The inscription read, "It is not seen, it is remembered." By the early 1930s, the legend of the Loch Ness creature had begun to evolve from folklore into phenomenon. The modern age demanded evidence, and the public was eager to witness what had only been whispered for centuries. In 1933, a road was completed along the north shore of the loch, offering travellers unobstructed views of the water for the first time. It was here, on a crisp April morning, that a local couple reported seeing an enormous creature cross the road ahead of them and slip into the water. Their story made headlines. For the first time, the world had a modern eyewitness account, and it ignited a storm. The press dubbed it the Monster of Loch Ness. Photographers, journalists, and thrill-seekers descended upon the region. Camera crews set up near bends in the road, hotels filled with skeptics and believers alike. That same year, the most infamous image of the creature appeared, the so-called surgeon's photograph. Captured in black and white, it showed a curved neck and small head rising from the water. Though later revealed to be a hoax, the image captivated imaginations across the globe. It planted an idea deeper than any truth or lie, that something could still hide in the modern world. Scientists, too, arrived. They brought sonar equipment, underwater microphones, and long cables wound with sensors. Some found odd readings, deep, slow-moving masses that did not match known aquatic life, but nothing definitive surfaced. The creature, if it was real, remained elusive. Some theorized it was a plesiosaur, a relic of prehistory. Others suggested it was a giant eel mutated by unknown forces. A few even claimed it wasn't a creature at all, but a manifestation, a projection of ancient emotion embedded in the water itself. Despite scientific scrutiny, local traditions endured. Children still sang verses warning not to stare too long into the black. Elderly residents refused to sail at night, and along the banks, candles were lit in windows facing the loch, a silent gesture of respect. One story told of a woman who saw ripples moving in the shape of a spiral, and later dreamed of an eye opening beneath the waves. She became a recluse, speaking only in riddles about the deep. Her cottage, abandoned now, remains untouched. Locals say even the animals avoid it. The 1930s made Loch Ness a name known in every corner of the world. Newspapers ran serialized tales, blending fact with fiction. Filmmakers proposed documentaries. Tour companies sold sightings by the hour, yet the loch never changed. It kept its rhythm, still, dark and steady. No roar, no revelation, just silence. And perhaps that, more than anything, is what continues to draw people here. In a world of answers, the loch remains a question, one asked not with the mouth, but with the heart. The 1940s brought war. While Europe burned and nations crumbled, Loch Ness remained still. The roar of distant bombers never echoed across its surface. Though the world reeled in chaos, the loch kept its ancient rhythm, untouched by the firestorms of men. Yet even here the war left whispers. RAF pilots based in northern Scotland reported strange disturbances in the loch during low flyovers. One flyer swore he saw something massive beneath the surface that cast a second shadow on the waves. Others described circles in the water that spun without wind, vanishing before they could turn back to observe. Wartime secrecy meant few reports reached the public, but locals continued to share tales. One account told of a blackout patrolman walking the loch's southern edge who vanished for hours. When found, he spoke in fragments, of green lights beneath the waves. of something rising and falling like breath, of hearing a name spoken inside his mind that he couldn't remember once the morning came. He never returned to the water's edge. Despite global conflict, fascination with the creature continued. Articles still appeared in back columns of wartime newspapers, squeezed between headlines of battles and treaties. Soldiers on leave visited the loch and sketched it in letters home. For many, the legend was a comfort, a reminder that something ancient and untouched still existed in a world tearing itself apart. The loch became a symbol of endurance. In 1945, as peace returned, so did a wave of renewed interest. With cameras in hand, veterans, scientists, and believers came once more. Among them was Dr. Marcus Bell, a marine biologist who brought with him new echo-sounding gear. His readings registered several large objects moving at depths far below what the team expected. One, he noted, remained stationary for over 6 hours, then vanished between scans. He wrote in his journal, "We may not be studying a fish, we may be studying a thought." That same year, a local artist named Iona Greer unveiled a mural painted on the wall of a former munitions storehouse. It depicted the loch beneath starlight, with the silhouette of the creature swimming under northern lights. When asked what inspired it, she said simply, "I saw it once, in silence, and it never left me." Through the turbulence of war and its uneasy aftermath, Loch Ness endured, unchanged, unreadable, and undiminished. It had no allegiance, no side, no country. It remained, as always, a body of water cloaked in fog, watching the world with ancient patience. And those who visited often left with a sense they couldn't quite name, something between reverence and the feeling of being seen. The 1950s arrived with a hum of optimism. The world, having survived a global cataclysm, turned its eyes to progress. Jet engines, television sets, the promise of rockets and distant planets. But even as humanity looked skyward, the mystery of Loch Ness pulled minds and hearts back down into the black water. With peacetime came resources, and with resources came technology, new tools, new maps, and renewed attention for the ancient riddle hiding just below the surface. In 1954, a fishing vessel named the Rival 3, equipped with sonar, was navigating near Urquhart Bay when the crew detected a massive, slow-moving object 480 feet below. The contact remained for several minutes, pacing the boat before it disappeared. The sonar technician William McClellan later described the reading as, "Not like fish, not like any known debris, it pulsed." The report was quietly circulated among researchers and eventually leaked to the press, sparking a flurry of investigations. Tourism blossomed, busloads of travelers lined the narrow roads, and small businesses thrived on the promise of the unknown. A new generation of eyewitness accounts emerged, many eerily similar in detail. A Boy Scout troop in 1956 swore they saw something breach the surface, not fully but enough to glimpse dark ridges and what they described as shoulders. A woman visiting from New Zealand captured a shaky 8mm film showing a disturbance in the loch's mirrored face. Though too distant for clarity, it sparked debate in scientific circles about wave behavior and subsurface displacement. Meanwhile, Loch Ness began to take root in pop culture. Comic strips, radio plays, and children's books introduced the creature to audiences far beyond the Highlands. Some portrayals were silly, Nessie as a friendly giant or a misunderstood sea cow. Others were haunting. Poetry collections spoke of eyes that remember the moon before men. These stories inspired artists and dreamers, but they also frustrated skeptics who believed myth was drowning truth. In response, formal research initiatives formed. The Loch Ness Investigation Bureau was established in 1961, combining volunteer observers with sonar arrays and telescopic lenses. Despite long vigils, no definitive proof emerged, but that in itself became part of the legend. People camped not to solve, but to witness. Nights beside the water became sacred for many, hours spent in quiet anticipation, scanning the darkness not just for movement, but for meaning. Loch Ness, by mid-century, had become more than a location. It was now an experience, a question people carried with them long after they left the shore. And for those who returned, the pull was not fame or proof. It was memory, a whisper, a sense that, beneath the waves, something watched still, not hiding from man, but waiting for the right eyes to see it. The 1960s opened with ambition and ended with revolution, and Loch Ness quietly absorbed it all. The loch did not blink when men walked on the moon, or when protest songs filled the streets. But it listened. The world may have been rushing forward, but time moved differently here. Scientists arrived with better tools, driven by the promise that technology could peel back mystery like old wallpaper, but the loch offered no such permission. The Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, now fully operational, established observation posts and underwater listening stations. Dozens of volunteers cycled through day and night watches, recording surface activity, wave patterns, and anything resembling movement. In 1968, the team captured a sonar trace, showing something enormous rising from 600 feet to just beneath the surface before disappearing in a sharp, vertical line. The equipment was checked. The reading held. The object, if real, had moved too quickly and too cleanly for any known fish. Nothing was seen, but something had passed. Reports poured in, more detailed, more consistent. One photograph taken in the fog of 1965 showed what appeared to be a broad, domed back cutting through the surface. It lacked definition, but the scale was undeniable. Another film captured in 1969 revealed an enormous disturbance in a calm bay. Observers described a stillness that came just before and a silence that lasted long after. Animals reportedly fled the shoreline without warning. A retired fisherman claimed the birds over that bay didn't return for days. While empirical proof remained elusive, cultural belief surged. Nessie appeared on book covers, album art, and even postage stamps. Children's encyclopedias included full-page spreads. Toy makers produced models that resembled plesiosaurs, and animated specials reimagined the beast as a misunderstood relic from another age. The creature became a bridge between science and myth, past and future. In 1970, a group of divers attempted one of the first human descents into the deepest trench of the loch, known ominously as the Pit. Strong currents and near-freezing temperatures forced an early ascent. But one diver, before losing radio contact, described seeing a massive shadow pass in front of the sunlit surface far above. He surfaced pale and shaken, refusing to dive again. His words were simple: "I wasn't alone." Later that year, a man claiming to be a former intelligence officer visited the Bureau's temporary station. He refused to give a name, but shared detailed sketches of the loch's floor and anomalies he said were buried deep under centuries of silt. He warned, "It's not what you think, it's older." Then he disappeared, leaving only the drawings, now kept in a private archive. What defined this decade was not proof, but persistence. The search had matured into something more meaningful than curiosity. To look for Nessie was to engage with the unknown on its own terms, patient, respectful, and open to awe. The 1970s brought a paradox to the shores of Loch Ness, a decade of rapid advancement in science and technology, alongside a cultural resurgence of mysticism and spiritualism. The world was unraveling the secrets of DNA and sending probes into deep space, yet millions were turning to astrology, tarot, and the inexplicable. It was during this strange balance of reason and reverence that Nessie became more than a legend. She became an icon. Armed with improved sonar and infrared imaging, new research teams arrived with international funding. Japanese, American, and German scientists all made their way to the loch. The 1972 Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Team recorded one of the clearest sonar contacts yet, a massive, fast-moving shape that briefly followed their boat. The reading held steady for nearly 2 minutes before the object slipped out of range. Despite clean data, nothing surfaced. One technician reportedly muttered, "It watches us as we watch it." Meanwhile, alternative theories took hold. Paranormal researchers suggested Nessie was a time anomaly, a creature slipping between eras. Others believed it was a biological entity that had learned to cloak itself, not with magic, but through evolutionary design. One fringe paper even proposed that Loch Ness sat on an energetic fault line, acting as a thin place between worlds. These ideas were laughed at by mainstream science, but they found eager audiences. Culturally, The loch became a symbol of what could not be claimed. Painters and poets, particularly those working in the Highlands, began creating dreamlike, surreal works featuring the creature. One well-known mural, now preserved in the Inverness Museum, shows Nessie swimming beneath a mirrored sky, stars above and below, its reflection the only visible proof. The artist said she painted it after hearing a low, echoing hum from the water while walking alone near foyers. Even skeptics were drawn in. An acclaimed physicist, Dr. Evelyn Moore, visited in 1977 for a week of private observation. She wrote afterward, "What I saw was nothing, but what I felt was everything. The air here is aware of you. That is not a scientific conclusion, but it is perhaps a truthful one." Toward the end of the decade, tourism soared. Hotels stayed full. Shops sold creature-shaped candles, maps and books. Yet despite the commercialization, the mystery endured. Each new sighting, each strange ripple, each unexplainable reading seemed to reinforce the same idea, that Loch Ness would not yield to fact or fiction. It existed in between, too real to dismiss, too strange to confirm. And in that in-between, it grew stronger. The 1980s arrived, wrapped in neon and broadcast signals, a decade of satellite feeds, computer chips and global connectivity. Yet Loch Ness stood outside of all of it. It absorbed the world's new technologies, not by yielding its secrets, but by deepening its enigma. Television crews became a near constant presence along the shoreline. Helicopters equipped with infrared and long-range lenses scanned the loch from above. Submersibles plumbed its depths with robotic precision. But the results remained, at best, suggestive. One of the most notable projects of the era was Operation Deep Scan in 1987. Over 20 boats equipped with sonar lined up across the width of the loch, sweeping in a coordinated formation. The goal? To produce a complete acoustic map of the loch's depths and, ideally, detect the elusive creature once and for all. The data returned showed several unexplained contacts, large moving objects deep below, distinct from known species. Though inconclusive, the findings reignited debate worldwide. Media coverage surged. Nessie became a recurring topic on nightly news and talk shows. Documentaries aired with ominous narration and dramatic reenactments. Loch Ness was no longer a mystery kept in the hills. It had become a fixture in the global imagination. And with this exposure came scrutiny. Skeptics called it mass delusion, a cultural hoax grown too large to die. But others saw something different, the persistence of a question in a world rushing towards certainty. In 1983, a local school teacher, Isla Reed, documented a personal encounter that would become one of the decade's most compelling testimonies. She claimed that while walking alone near Invermoriston at dawn, she saw a long shape rise from the water and remain motionless for nearly 20 seconds before slipping beneath the surface. It wasn't frightening, she later said. It was like watching an idea breathe. Her journal, filled with poems and charcoal sketches, was later exhibited at a folk heritage centre. Even as technology pressed forward, spiritual interpretations returned. Some Highland elders believed the creature had grown weary of being pursued and had retreated deeper, not just physically, but spiritually. They spoke of the loch growing quieter, less generous with sightings, as if protecting its guardian. One old tale resurfaced, that the creature could not be seen unless it chose to be, and that its gaze could change a person forever. By the end of the decade, the legend had weathered yet another storm of doubt and fascination. The more eyes watched, the more the water seemed to darken, and yet it continued to draw them. In a world that was becoming ever more visible, Loch Ness remained hidden, not because it refused to be seen, but because perhaps, just perhaps, it was never meant to be solved. The 1990s unfolded beneath a banner of digital promise. The world was becoming searchable, connectable, downloadable. Satellites orbited in silence, scanning everything. The internet crept into homes, carrying with it both information and illusion. And through it all, Loch Ness remained, a body of water unmoved by Wi-Fi signals or data speeds. If anything, the loch seemed to resist the era's thirst for exposure. The more the world pointed cameras, the less it revealed. Still, the pursuit intensified. new radar-equipped submersibles were deployed, some capable of mapping previously unreachable trenches. One such vehicle, operated in 1994 by an Anglo-French research group, reported passing over a fissure that appeared to descend deeper than previously charted depths. As the camera panned the crevice, the feed cut to static. Engineers recovered the unit and found no mechanical failure. On review, the final frame before signal loss showed what appeared to be a long, organic curve retreating into darkness. At the same time, satellite imaging began to offer a new perspective. Though not designed for the Loch's peculiar dimensions, high-resolution overhead scans occasionally showed thermal irregularities, narrow, moving trails of warmer water that defied explanation. Meteorological agencies dismissed them as sun-heated currents. Cryptid researchers claimed them as migration paths. The Loch, as always, made no comment. But the 1990s were also the decade of skepticism. Television specials aired with titles like Loch Ness, The End of the Mystery, and Debunking the Deep. CGI recreations simulated the creature's anatomy. Debates flared between academics and believers. Forums filled with heated arguments. And yet, amidst all the digital noise, one image captured attention. A photo taken by a young girl with a disposable camera. It showed the Loch at dusk, calm and grey. Near the centre, a ripple, barely noticeable. But above it, a shape, a thin neck, and the faint outline of a head, caught between reflection and shadow. She was 11. She said nothing more than, "I was taking a picture of the sky." The photo was never disproved, never explained. It sat in magazines beside satellite data and skeptical essays. In that decade of explanation, its silence said more than any argument. For every scanned trench and digital theory, the Loch remained immune to conclusion. It outlived the decade's confidence. It absorbed the debate. And by the year 2000, it had become clear. The question of Nessie was no longer just about biology or myth. It was about belief in the unseen, a reflection of what we fear we've lost in our search to know everything. A quiet place, a shadow that cannot be uploaded, a presence that asks for nothing but wonder. The dawn of the 21st century brought with it a sharper lens. High-speed connections and digital overlays rendered the globe visible in ways never imagined. Drones soared, smartphones snapped, and every lake, mountain and shadow was seemingly catalogued. Yet, in the northern reaches of Scotland, Loch Ness still managed to avoid resolution. If anything, the rise of surveillance culture made the Loch more powerful because it could not be captured. In 2003, the BBC funded one of the most extensive sonar explorations to date. Using state-of-the-art equipment and sonar arrays that scanned the entire length of the Loch, researchers reported zero evidence of large aquatic animals. The media declared it a debunking. But locals noted something curious. The week of the tests, the Loch was still. No birds over the water, no wind along the surface. Fishermen said even the eels were gone. It was like the whole place held its breath, one man told a local paper. This disconnect between data and experience became the defining paradox of the modern Nessie era. Digital archives swelled with explanations, but the creature refused to disappear. Sightings continued, though now many were dismissed immediately online. Blurry images uploaded to forums were scrutinized within hours. Amateur videos were broken down frame by strangers continents away. The myth had gone global, and with it, the scrutiny. But not all was lost to cynicism. In 2008, a climatologist named Dr. Yusuf Han visited the Loch during a sabbatical. Though not there to study Nessie, he became fascinated by the microclimate above the water. He observed strange fog patterns, sudden drops in pressure, and what he described as pockets of stillness, where sound behaved unusually. His research, though academic, concluded, this is not just water, this is a system with memory. The cultural lens also shifted. Documentaries became more introspective. Rather than asking, is it real? They asked, why do we want it to be? Nessie was no longer just a cryptid. She was a metaphor, a mirror. Children visiting the Loch still stared into the waves. Artists painted its mist. Poets returned to the language of old ballads. And though digital eyes watched every ripple, the legend endured, not because of what was seen, but because of what was felt. By the end of the decade, the world had grown louder, faster, more immediate. But Loch Ness remained patient. It asked for nothing. It gave little. And in doing so, it reminded us of the value of mystery, of something ancient that does not need to change to remain relevant, of a question that continues to echo, unanswered. The 2020s arrived not with fireworks, but with a hush. The world paused under the weight of a global pandemic. People stayed home, cities fell quiet, flights were grounded. Yet in that sudden stillness, eyes turned again toward the places that had always been waiting. Loch Ness, undisturbed and ageless, became once more a sanctuary for those seeking something unmeasurable. And in a strange twist of fate, the digital age that had once tried to expose every secret now became a bridge back to awe. Webcam footage from the loch saw a dramatic uptick in traffic. Millions watched the water from around the world, and in 2020 alone, more than a dozen notable disturbances were logged by online viewers. Not grainy figures or obvious tricks of the light, but subtle, rhythmic movements across calm surfaces. One clip, recorded by a viewer in Canada, showed a single ripple trailing diagonally across the water before vanishing into fog. Analysts debated it. Botanists blamed underwater vegetation, but thousands saved the video, thousands watched it again. With traditional travel restricted, drone footage became the new exploration tool. Pilots launched quiet flights at dawn and dusk, capturing sweeping shots of the loch, cloaked in morning mist. One viral video, posted by a local photographer, caught something peculiar, a perfectly circular wave pattern expanding outward near the loch's center, with no origin point. The comments flooded in, some mocking, others wide-eyed, but even skeptics admitted it was unusual. Loch Ness became a symbol again, not just of mystery but of endurance. Through isolation, people began writing about the creature with renewed reverence. Poets called it the still heart of the north. Musicians recorded ambient albums inspired by the loch's breath-like movement. A short animated film titled The One Who Watches premiered online, telling the story of a young girl who finds peace, not by seeing the creature but by knowing it's there. Meanwhile, scientific interest returned with quieter ambition. A team from the University of Oslo revisited archived sonar data from the previous decade and found new patterns in how deep currents move through the loch. Their hypothesis? That something large and consistent had shaped the sediment flows over time. They called it a long guessed. They never mentioned Nessie directly, but the implication was clear. As the world slowly reopened, the loch remained the same, not because it resisted change, but because it had already mastered what the rest of us were rediscovering: how to be still. In an age of acceleration, Loch Ness offered pause, not an answer, but a breath. And somewhere in that stillness, something watched. Or perhaps something waited. As the decade advanced, so too did the tools used to search. Artificial intelligence joined the hunt, passing decades of sonar data, photographs and environmental logs. Programs trained to recognize anomalies ran through thousands of hours of footage and returned not conclusions, but questions. A pattern of circular wave formations consistent across decades and weather conditions, a recurrence of underwater echo anomalies always appearing near the same trench. Even AI built to clarify could only nod towards something unresolved. In 2022, a collaborative research project between universities in Scotland, Norway and Japan sought to perform the most comprehensive hydroacoustic scan in the loch's history. The equipment was flawless, the coverage was total, and yet at the scan's midpoint, a system-wide malfunction halted operations for precisely 13 minutes. No damage, no explanation. One technician reported a high-pitched ringing in his ears before the blackout, though no one else heard it. The incident was filed quietly under environmental interference, but beyond the equipment and data, something deeper had begun to shift. The narrative of Nessie had grown up. No longer framed as a monster, a relic, or a trick of the eye, she was now referred to by some as a phenomenon, an echo in the landscape, a response to attention. Articles appeared in academic journals examining the loch not just as a body of water, but as a living symbol. Sociologists called it a shared threshold, a place where modern minds brush against ancient longing. Cultural tributes reflected this change. A new children's book, The Loch That Dreamed, became a bestseller across Europe, telling the tale of a body of water that remembered everything it ever saw. The creature within it was not scary, but curious, a being drawn to songs, stories, and human silence. Critics called it a lullaby for the unexplained. A documentary titled Stillness Below won awards for its haunting imagery and refusal to conclude anything. It simply presented the loch and let it breathe. Tourism remained steady but quieter. Fewer came seeking proof. More came to feel, to stand in mist and imagine the weight of centuries pressing against their shoulders. One visitor wrote in the guest book of a local inn, "I came for a photo. I left having had a conversation with silence." By 2024, the legend had stopped trying to convince. It didn't need believers, it didn't require defenders. It had transcended skepticism and embraced something older, presence. Loch Ness had become a myth not because it could not be proven, but because it had chosen to become a place where proving was no longer the point. And perhaps, deep below, something smiled. By 2025, the legend of Loch Ness had ceased to be treated as an outlier or anomaly. It had matured into a quiet cultural institution. Not a solved mystery, but an accepted one. Not unlike Stonehenge or the pyramids, it stood not because of what it gave away, but because of what it continued to withhold. And in an age obsessed with speed and novelty, the loch's refusal to yield had become its most powerful gesture. That same year, a collaboration between Scotland's National Museum and the Royal Conservatoire of Music resulted in an experimental symphony titled Depths Unspoken. Rather than perform a traditional piece, the orchestra recorded over hydrophones lowered deep into the loch. They played into the water. The sounds, distorted and warped by liquid density, were then played back above ground as the second movement. The result was haunting. It was not music in the conventional sense, it was communion. An international conference on folklore in the modern world, held in Edinburgh, featured Loch Ness not as a case study of superstition, but of resilience. It was cited as one of the few legends that had not only survived modernity, but had grown because of it. As myths collapsed under fact, Nessie remained, not immune to science, but beyond its jurisdiction. Younger generations began to reclaim the story in their own way. Artists on TikTok painted Nessie as guardian, not monster, protector of hidden truths. A viral short story portrayed the creature as the last memory of Earth, before humans forgot how to feel. School children wrote essays about why the loch mattered, not for what was in it, but because it taught them patience. One child simply wrote, "It doesn't talk, but it listens. That's why we love it." Scientific interest shifted too. Rather than search for the creature itself, new research began exploring how belief in Nessie affected regional ecology. One working paper from a Scottish university proposed that the preservation of the loch's environment was directly linked to the persistence of the myth, that people protected the water not because of what it held, but because of what it meant. And still, strange sightings persisted. A kayaker near Fort Augustus reported feeling something pass beneath him that was too large to describe and too quiet to fear. A park ranger posted a thermal image showing a warm shape gliding beneath a colder surface. Both were dismissed by officials. Neither was forgotten in the end. The story of Loch Ness was no longer about discovery. It had become an act of listening, to the water, to the generations before, to the silence that still echoes through the mist. The legend endured, not because it demanded to be solved, but because it reminded us that not everything sacred needs to be proven. Some things are sacred because they remain. In 2025, with the world more connected than ever, something remarkable happened. The legend of Loch Ness began to be treated not just as a cultural relic, but as an active, evolving relationship between place and people. Rather than chase the creature with drones and sonar, a growing number of visitors and researchers embraced a quieter approach. They listened, they observed, they waited. That summer, a grassroots initiative called Guardians of the Loch emerged, a loose collective of artists, scientists, and local residents. Their mission wasn't to find Nessie, but to protect the conditions in which such a mystery could thrive. They held poetry readings beside the loch at dawn, created moss-carved stone markers etched with lines of Highland verse, and recorded audio meditations inspired by local bird calls and water rhythms. One piece, titled "What the Loch Keeps," was streamed over 2 million times, not because it promised answers, but because it felt like stillness. Elsewhere, a team of ecologists published a report analyzing 70 years of water temperature, fish migration, and sonar anomalies. They concluded not with certainty, but with awe. This is one of the most complex aquatic ecosystems in the British Isles, and yet we still do not understand its silence. Stories persisted. A father and daughter fishing near Invermoriston claimed to see a shape glide beneath their small boat, large and slow, with a shadow that seemed to blink. The child said it felt like being watched by something old and kind. Their account made local news, then disappeared beneath more pressing headlines. But in the village the story stayed. It joined the others. As autumn fell over the Highlands, the loch turned inward once more, reflective, slow, meditative. The leaves changed, the water cooled, candles reappeared in windows. And somewhere beyond the reeds, something breathed. No photos, no proof, only presence. Loch Ness, in this moment, stood not as a myth, but as a mirror, reflecting our deepest hope that something vast and mysterious still lives just beyond the reach of certainty. And perhaps that's what we've been protecting all along. Not a monster, not a creature, but the idea that mystery still matters. There is a rhythm to the loch that no instrument has ever captured. An ebb and pulse older than names. In the stillness between waves, the land listens, and those who walk its banks with open hearts sometimes feel it. The sensation of standing in the presence of something vast but not hostile. Not threatening, simply ancient. Locals say that sometimes just before sunrise the mist drapes the surface in a way that looks like breath. Not fog, not steam, breath. You can see the water inhale, then hold it, then let it go. Some who have witnessed it refuse to describe it at all. They say language falls short. That it's not about seeing something in the water, but about feeling like the loch is seeing you. Children still toss pebbles and make wishes. Artists still bring sketchbooks and stare too long into the light. Researchers, even the most skeptical, leave changed. Not always convinced, but often quieter. It's not the absence of evidence that moves them, but the presence of something unnameable. The loch is not empty. It is full of memory, of story, of time too thick to pass through quickly. It is not haunted, it is inhabited. Not necessarily by a creature of scale and shape, but by myth in its purest form. And that is something that resists extinction in this age of endless data and diminishing wonder. Loch Ness offers no climax, it offers continuation. Not a resolution, but a rhythm. And those who visit, whether for science or for story, often find themselves caught in that current, leaving not with footage or findings, but with a sense that they've been somewhere real, where myth is not decoration, but foundation. Every culture has its great unanswered question. Some build theirs into temples, some carve them into stone. In the Highlands, they leave them floating in mist. Loch Ness is not a story told to solve, it is one meant to endure. Passed through families, etched in paintings, felt in fog, it has become less a mystery to crack than a silence to respect. Folk stories still whisper of an ancient presence. Not just a single creature, but a shifting awareness beneath the waves. Something old that remembers every stone tossed into its depths. Some locals speak of moments alone by the water when they feel suddenly accompanied. Not watched, exactly. Held. There are no grand sightings, no cameras that catch the impossible, but each year, new stories emerge, shapes half glimpsed in the twilight, strange ripples where no wind blows, eyes that might have blinked and then were gone. These are not headlines, they are half-tales, quiet recollections shared over mugs of tea and long walks. The power of the legend is not that it demands belief, it's that it invites attention, careful attention, reverent attention. And in giving it, people begin to notice more. The flight of birds, the weight of clouds, the sound of wind tracing across dark water. Nessie becomes not a thing to prove, but a reason to look closer. Those who come to the loch with cameras may leave with nothing on film, but many leave with something more, a shift in posture, a softened voice, a gaze that lingers longer on the horizon. Because Loch Ness has never been about what is found, it has always been about what is felt, the steady presence of wonder in a world too quick to name everything it cannot hold. Not all mysteries are meant to be loud. Some whisper, some hum in the marrow of a place, felt more than found. Loch Ness is such a place. It does not need dramatics or revelations. It needs only time, and it offers it freely to those willing to slow down and listen. At its edge, people stand longer than they plan. Conversations trail off. Phones remain in pockets. What begins as a sightseeing stop becomes a kind of quiet ritual, an act of presence. Some compare it to meditation, others prayer. The loch doesn't ask for belief, it offers stillness, and in that stillness, something moves. not in the water but in the person watching it. There are those who have returned year after year, never having seen anything they could name, and yet they keep coming. They describe the draw as a pull in the chest, a gravity older than curiosity. A sense that something ancient is holding space, not for spectacle but for reverence. These are not tourists, they are pilgrims. And the loch, to them, is not a location, it's a threshold. Writers speak of Nessie now not as a beast but as a metaphor, a mirror of what it means to live with questions that may never be answered. She has become a symbol of patience in a world driven by urgency, a reminder that wonder doesn't need resolution to be real, it only needs room. Along the banks, small cairns appear stacked by unknown hands, painted stones with symbols, bits of ribbon tied to driftwood, a growing language of quiet devotion, not offerings to a monster, but gestures of acknowledgement to whatever it is that lives in the silence. Whether that's a creature, or memory, or myth incarnate, it matters less than the moment of honouring it. Loch Ness does not roar, it echoes, through centuries, through stories, through generations, and it teaches those who stand before it that mystery, once welcomed, is not something to be solved. It is something to be kept with care, with awe, with the understanding that not every truth belongs in daylight. Some belong in the mist, forever watching, forever waiting, forever unknown. If there is a final lesson from Loch Ness, it may be this. The mystery is not fragile. It does not dissolve under scrutiny. It deepens. The more eyes look, the more it asks us to see differently. The more questions we ask, the more it reminds us that not all questions seek answers. Some simply want to be heard. The loch has become a repository of those kinds of questions. They arrive as tourists and leave as echoes, carried in the minds of those who stood at its shore, who heard nothing and yet came away changed. For some, it's the shape in the mist. For others, a moment of inexplicable stillness. For a few, it's the certainty that something just beneath the surface noticed them and chose to remain unseen. Communities surrounding the loch have learned to live alongside the unknown. It no longer startles, it comforts. Folk tales once shared in hushed tones are now part of everyday speech. A farmer pointing toward the water might simply say, "She's quiet today." No one asks who. They know. In schoolrooms, children are taught the science of sonar and ecosystems, and also given time to write stories about the creature in the deep. Both are treated with respect. Pilgrimages continue. Some come alone. Some arrive in groups, heads bowed as if stepping into sacred space. They do not seek spectacle. They seek stillness. They speak softly by the water. They sit on stones warmed by the sun. They stare until the mist rises or the wind carries them home. Many leave tokens, pages torn from notebooks, tiny sculptures carved from driftwood, words scratched into smooth stones. Few return to find them again. That is not the point. And what of Nessie? Perhaps she is not one thing, not a plesiosaur, not a ghost, not an eel, nor a god. Perhaps she is all of them, or none. Perhaps she is the shape we give to the ache for wonder we feel in our bones, a form that floats just far enough beyond reach to remain sacred. If she has survived centuries of doubt and discovery, perhaps it is because she was never meant to be discovered, only remembered. Loch Ness remains dark, still, unmoved, and yet entirely alive. In its waters, the past and present intermingle. In its mists, belief and observation meet without conflict. The loch invites no answers. It offers an invitation, not to find, but to feel, not to prove, but to pause, not to claim, but to wonder. And maybe that's the final truth, that the most powerful legends are the ones that let us ask, without ever needing to know. There is something elemental about Loch Ness, not just in its geography, but in its gravity. It is not only a place where water meets land, but where the seen meets the unseen, the remembered meets the forgotten, and the possible meets the impossible. Standing at its edge, people have spoken of feeling small, but never insignificant. The loch does not diminish. It expands the idea of time. Fossils beneath its floor predate human speech. Its waters cycle with rhythms older than any calendar. Some say the loch exists in layers, not just physical, but emotional, even spiritual. On some days it is a mirror, on others a veil, and sometimes when the light bends and the fog parts just so, it is a doorway, a place where the world thins. The stories passed down through Highland families have changed tone over generations. Once told with fear, They are now told with reverence. Parents don't warn their children about the monster. They teach them to be gentle with silence, to listen to what isn't said, to respect what cannot be reached. A shadow on the water is not a threat, but a reminder that not all things are ours to chase. Folklorists who once sought to pin down the legend now write about it with humility. One recent essay described Loch Ness as a living poem without punctuation. Always breathing, always becoming. It isn't a story that ends, it's a story that waits. Every visitor, every gaze, every word spoken into its mist becomes part of it. The creature, whatever it is less a subject of the story and more its shape. And that story has become global. Cultures far from Scotland now fold Nessie into their own myths. She swims through murals in Mexico, lullabies in Japan, sculptures in Norway. She appears in dances, in dreams, in digital animations shared across oceans. And though each expression is different, the heart remains the same. A longing for something that exists beyond certainty, beyond language, beyond proof. This is how legends survive, not through validation, but through value. Loch Ness continues not because it gives us answers, but because it offers us meaning. In a world that rewards only what can be measured, here lies a place that measures us, by our wonder, by our willingness to wait, by the silence we can hold without trying to fill it. To walk beside the loch is to walk beside generations of question keepers, those who honored mystery not as an absence, but as a presence. And in doing so they left something behind, a path, a feeling, a gentle urging toward the edge of what we know, and the beginning of what we choose to believe. And perhaps the most unsettling truth of all is this: the story may not be waiting for us, it may be watching. There are places around the loch where the trees lean differently, where birds fall silent without reason, where time feels slow, but the skin pricks like it's being noticed. Not threatened, not stalked, just noticed. Some who come alone speak of dreams that follow them home, not nightmares, but memories of places they've never seen, water they've never touched, voices they've never heard, whispering in languages without words. We say the loch hides a creature. We never ask if the creature is hiding something else. The water is deep, but deeper still are the thoughts that surface when you stare too long. A face in the reflection that isn't quite your own, a sound behind you that leaves no echo, a certainty that something is beneath, not because you saw it, but because you didn't. A story that lives this long, that resists time and scrutiny, may not be just a legend, it may be a design, something placed, something that grows not in the soil of belief, but in the tension of uncertainty. What if Loch Ness is not the keeper of the myth, but the myth made flesh? The banks are quiet now, the tourists have gone, only the wind and the low lap of water remain. And in that silence, if you listen closely, you might hear it, a breath, a blink, a ripple where nothing should move. You tell yourself it's nothing, and maybe that's what it wants. After all, the deepest mysteries are not those we cannot explain. They're the ones that explain us, and then vanish. Well, my good friends, we are sadly at the end of our journey. Hopefully you are sound asleep, counting those little Loch Ness jumping over the bed by now. We do appreciate you tuning in, and if you could like and subscribe for lots more coming, good night, my friends.